At 5:17 p.m. on May 22, 2011, the sirens over Joplin, Missouri sound for the second time in less than half an hour. Most of the city does not move. This is not because the people of Joplin are careless. It is not because they did not hear the warning. Joplin's outdoor warning siren system was, at the time, considered one of the more advanced municipal tornado alert networks in the region. Installed and maintained specifically because the city sits inside one of the highest tornado frequency corridors on the planet. The sirens worked exactly as designed. They sounded loud, they sounded clear, and they sounded in direct response to a tornado warning that the National Weather Service had just issued for the supercell thunderstorm approaching from the southwest. A warning that arrived with 17 minutes of lead time before the tornado's first touchdown in the city. More advance notice than the historical average for tornado warnings in this exact region. And still, when the actual tornado arrived 17 minutes later, hundreds of people were caught in cars, in stores, in homes, with no safe room, looking out windows at what they believed was simply a very bad thunderstorm. The tornado that struck Joplin at 5:34 p.m. was wrapped entirely in rain. It was not the funnel-shaped, visually identifiable tornado that most Americans have learned to recognize from a lifetime of storm footage and severe weather coverage. It looked, from the ground, like a wall of gray rain and debris with no clear shape, no visible rotation that an untrained eye could distinguish from straight-line wind, no warning silhouette against the sky. People who survived described not realizing what they were looking at until debris was already striking their homes. It went on to kill 161 people. It remains the deadliest single tornado in the United States since modern record-keeping began tracking individual tornado death tolls with confidence, and the costliest tornado in American history in terms of direct economic damage. It happened in a city with what may have been the best siren infrastructure of any comparable American town. It happened despite 17 minutes of formal warning time before the tornado made ground contact in the city. More lead time than the historical average for tornado warnings in this exact region. And it happened because of a combination of factors that meteorologists had begun to document only in the years immediately preceding 2011, and that the disaster itself would force into urgent, formal study, warning fatigue, rain wrapping, extraordinarily rapid intensification, and a specific failure mode in how Americans process repeated emergency alerts. This is the story of what happens when the warning system works exactly as designed and still is not enough. It is the story of a tornado that intensified from nothing to EF5, the strongest rating on the tornado damage scale. In a matter of minutes, hitting a hospital, a high school, and a residential core of more than 75,000 people, with a force that meteorologists had rarely documented at that speed of escalation. And it is the story of what changed in American tornado warning science because of what happened in Joplin that afternoon. Changes that are still, more than a decade later, incomplete, contested, and actively being studied by every emergency management agency that has its own version of the gap between what a siren says and what a population believes. In cities and regions far beyond southwest Missouri that have not yet had their own Joplin, and are trying with mixed success to learn the lesson before they do. If this kind of deep, real science holds your attention, take a second to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps. The sirens sounded. The warning was issued. The tornado came anyway. Let's begin. Joplin, Missouri sits in the southwest corner of the state, in a region of rolling hills and former lead and zinc mining country that, geographically places it squarely within the extended reach of Tornado Alley. The corridor of the central United States, where the collision of warm Gulf moisture and cool, dry continental air produces the highest concentration of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes on Earth. The city had a population of approximately 50,000 in 2011, with a broader metropolitan footprint closer to 75,000 when surrounding communities are included. It was a regional commercial and medical hub for a wide swath of rural southwest Missouri, northeast Oklahoma, and southeast Kansas, drawing residents from dozens of smaller surrounding towns for shopping, healthcare, and employment in a way that gave the disaster's effects a reach far beyond the city's own population count. St. John's Regional Medical Center, a 9-story hospital near the center of the city, served patients from across that entire multi-county region, making it one of the most important pieces of medical infrastructure for an area covering thousands of square miles. This regional significance is part of why the Joplin tornado's impact rippled outward so far beyond the city limits. Communities 30, 40, 50 miles away depended on Joplin's hospital, Joplin's retail and grocery infrastructure, and Joplin's place as the largest employment center within reasonable commuting distance. When the tornado removed a substantial fraction of that infrastructure in a matter of minutes, the disruption extended through a regional economy and healthcare network that had no comparable backup capacity within reach. May 22, 2011 began as an unremarkable severe weather day by the standards of a region that experiences dozens of such days every spring. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, the same federal office responsible for issuing severe weather risk outlooks across the country, had placed southwest Missouri under a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms that day, citing the potential for large hail, damaging winds, and a few tornadoes. This was a serious forecast, but not an unprecedented one. The region had seen moderate risk days many times in recent springs without producing an event on the scale of what would happen that evening. What the forecast did not, could not, specify with precision was when, where, and how violently any individual storm cell would develop within the broader risk area. That specificity, the difference between a regional risk assessment covering tens of thousands of square miles and a warning for a specific city in a specific window of minutes, is the central challenge of tornado forecasting. And it is the gap that the events of May 22 would expose in ways that reshaped the field. By mid-afternoon, a complex of thunderstorms had developed across the region, producing the kind of multicellular severe weather that southwest Missouri sees regularly in May. Initial thunderstorm activity passed through the area without producing significant tornadic development. The atmosphere, however, was continuing to recover and destabilize behind the morning's activity, with sunshine breaking through in the early afternoon and surface temperatures climbing into the 80s, adding fuel to an environment that was already primed by the moisture and wind profile in place. Then, in the time window between approximately 5:00 and 5:30 p.m., a specific supercell thunderstorm, the rotating storm structure that produces the overwhelming majority of strong and violent tornadoes, began organizing on the southwestern edge of Joplin, with a speed that radar meteorologists watching it that afternoon would later describe in technical post-event analysis as unusually rapid, even by the standards of an already volatile setup. To understand why this particular storm became so deadly, you have to understand the specific atmospheric conditions that converged over Joplin that afternoon, and why those conditions produced a tornado that did not look or behave like the tornadoes most American storm warning systems and most American storm safety culture are calibrated to detect and communicate clearly. The atmosphere over southwest Missouri on May 22, 2011, contained 3 ingredients in a combination that meteorologists recognize as conducive to the most violent tornado category: extreme instability, extreme wind shear, and exceptionally high low-level moisture. All 3 were present simultaneously in the same air mass over the same several-hour window directly above the same city. Instability is the measure of how readily air will rise once it begins rising, the atmospheric equivalent of a ball balanced at the top of a hill rather than resting in a valley. Meteorologists measure it using a metric called convective available potential energy, or CAPE, which estimates the energy available to a parcel of air that is forced to rise from the surface through the atmosphere above it. On May 22, CAPE values across southwest Missouri were measured in the range associated with the most dangerous severe weather setups, thousands of joules per kilogram. The kind of number that, when combined with adequate wind shear, produces not just thunderstorms, but the specific rotating supercell structures capable of generating violent tornadoes. Forecasters at the Storm Prediction Center and the Springfield National Weather Service office were tracking these values closely throughout the afternoon, and the numbers were consistent with, and in some respects exceeded, the values typically associated with the most violent tornado outbreaks in the historical record for this region. Wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height above the ground, is the second critical ingredient, and it is the one that actually generates rotation. Think of wind shear as the invisible machinery that takes the raw vertical energy of an unstable atmosphere and twists it into a spinning shape. When winds near the surface are blowing from one direction at one speed, and winds a few thousand feet above are blowing from a different direction at a different, typically faster speed, the atmosphere between those 2 layers develops a horizontal spinning motion, like a pencil rolling between 2 hands moving at different speeds. When a powerful rising thunderstorm updraft encounters that horizontal spin, it can tilt the spinning air from horizontal to vertical, creating the rotating column of air at the base of the storm called a mesocyclone. The mesocyclone is the parent structure from which a tornado, if conditions allow, will eventually descend to the ground. On May 22, 2011, wind shear values over southwest Missouri were in a range that forecasters would later describe as among the more extreme combinations recorded for the region that spring. The shear was not just present, it was layered through the atmosphere in a way that favored not just rotation, but sustained, intensifying rotation over an extended vertical depth of the storm, from very near the surface up through the mid-levels of the atmosphere where the parent mesocyclone circulation was organizing. This deep layer shear profile is specifically associated in the meteorological literature with the kind of long-lived, intensifying supercells that produce the strongest and longest-tracked tornadoes, as opposed to the shorter-lived, weaker circulations that more commonly accompany severe thunderstorm days. The third ingredient, low-level moisture, is what fueled the rain wrapping that would prove so deadly. Dew points across the warm sector ahead of the developing storm system were unusually high for the date, with moist Gulf air having surged northward in the days preceding the event, pooling at the surface across southwest Missouri in a way that meteorologists specifically flagged as a contributing factor to the day's severe weather potential. High low-level moisture does 2 things simultaneously. It provides additional fuel for the thunderstorm updraft, intensifying the storm's overall strength by increasing the available instability near the surface where storms draw their initial energy. And it increases the likelihood that the storm will produce heavy rainfall wrapping around the tornado itself, obscuring the funnel from visual observation at ground level and from a distance. Because the same moist air that fuels storm intensity also condenses into the precipitation that envelops the circulation. This is the part of the Joplin story that did not receive adequate public attention in the immediate aftermath, and that meteorologists consider central to understanding why the warning system, despite functioning correctly by every formal metric, failed to translate into adequate protective action for so many residents. A classic tornado, the kind most Americans have learned to visually identify from a lifetime of storm-chasing footage, severe weather documentaries, and news broadcasts, descends from a relatively visible wall cloud, often silhouetted against a lighter sky in the distance. With a funnel shape that narrows from the cloud base toward the ground, and that storm spotters and ordinary residents alike have been trained, through decades of public safety messaging, to recognize. This visual signature is the foundation of an enormous amount of grassroots tornado safety behavior in tornado-prone regions. People see the funnel, and they act. Generations of tornado safety education in the American Midwest and South have been built around this visual recognition model, because for most of the history of tornado science, visual confirmation by trained spotters was the only reliable, real-time confirmation method available, predating even basic radar. A rain-wrapped tornado provides none of that visual signature. Heavy rainfall, driven by the storm's intense moisture content and reinforced by the storm's structure, specifically the way precipitation in a mature supercell can wrap cyclonically around the mesocyclone and the tornado embedded within it, surrounds the tornado on most or all sides, reducing visibility to a wall of gray precipitation with no discernible funnel shape. From a distance, a rain-wrapped tornado looks like an ordinary, if unusually heavy, area of rainfall. From close range, within a mile or less, it can look like a chaotic, formless mass of wind-driven debris and water, with no visual cue indicating organized rotation. The visual cue that an entire culture of tornado safety behavior depends on simply does not exist for a rain-wrapped event. The training that tells people to look for a funnel and act when they see one provides no actionable signal when there is no funnel visible to see, regardless of how violent the actual tornado beneath the rain curtain has become. The supercell that produced the Joplin tornado was rain-wrapped almost from the moment its tornado touched down. Storm spotters and even some trained meteorologists in the field that afternoon had significant difficulty visually confirming the tornado's presence, location, and intensity in real time, despite radar data clearly showing the signature of a violently rotating, intensifying circulation. This created a specific and consequential gap. The radar told one story with high confidence: a strong, organized, rapidly intensifying circulation consistent with a violent tornado. The view from the ground for people without access to radar told an ambiguous story that did not match the urgency the radar data indicated. A resident standing at their window, looking southwest toward the approaching storm, saw heavy rain and reduced visibility, conditions that on their own are common during any severe thunderstorm and do not, by themselves, communicate the presence of a tornado of historic violence approaching at considerable forward speed. Here is the part of the meteorological record that deserves the most careful attention, because it represents one of the most extreme rapid intensification events that had been documented with this level of instrumentation up to that point in American tornado history. The tornado that struck Joplin first touched down at approximately 5:34 p.m. on the southwestern edge of the city. Post-event damage surveys conducted by National Weather Service teams in the days following the disaster reconstructed the tornado's intensity at multiple points along its track using the enhanced Fujita scale, the damage-based classification system that estimates wind speed from the destruction pattern left on buildings, trees, and other structures. Since direct wind speed measurement inside a tornado remains extraordinarily difficult and rare, requiring either a mobile Doppler radar unit positioned with precise timing and proximity, or, far less commonly, an in situ probe placed directly in the tornado's path, an undertaking that storm researchers attempt only a handful of times per year across the entire country. Given the obvious danger and the narrow window of opportunity involved, the reconstruction showed that the tornado intensified from its initial touchdown to EF4 or EF5 intensity. Wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, the strongest category on the damage scale, within a span that some analyses placed at under 20 minutes. And that some sections of the most detailed post-event reconstruction placed at closer to 10 to 15 minutes from initial touchdown to peak intensity over the most severely damaged sections of the city. This rate of intensification, while not entirely without precedent in the historical tornado record, was extreme enough that it placed real strain on the available warning lead time. Because tornado warnings are issued based on radar signatures and ground reports that exist at the moment of issuance, they cannot fully anticipate a rate of strengthening that exceeds what the storm's radar signature, interpreted using the meteorological knowledge available in 2011, suggested was likely. Think of it as the difference between a fire that grows at a predictable, manageable rate that firefighters can plan around, and a fire that, due to a specific and rare combination of fuel and wind conditions, doubles in size every 90 seconds. The firefighting protocol designed around the first kind of fire, adequate under normal circumstances, becomes dangerously inadequate when applied to the second kind, not because the protocol is flawed in general, but because it was never designed to account for that rate of escalation. What makes this rapid intensification problem particularly difficult from a forecasting standpoint is the specific physics of how a tornado transitions from a weak, narrow circulation to a violent, wide one. Tornado intensification is not generally a smooth, linear process. It often proceeds through a structural transition that storm researchers call cycling. A process in which the tornado's circulation, the mesocyclone feeding it, and the larger supercell's internal structure interact in a feedback loop that can either choke off the tornado's strength or rapidly amplify it, depending on small variations in the storm's internal moisture distribution, the position and strength of the rear flank downdraft, a specific current of descending air on the storm's backside that plays a critical role in tornado formation and maintenance, and several other variables that, even with high-resolution radar, are difficult to observe with the precision needed to anticipate which direction the cycling process will take in real time. The National Weather Service office responsible for the Joplin area, located in Springfield, Missouri, issued a tornado warning for the storm at 5:17 p.m., 17 minutes before the tornado's first touchdown in the city, and well within the range that meteorologists consider adequate average lead time for tornado warnings in this region. This was not a failure of warning issuance. The warning was timely by the standards used to evaluate warning performance nationally, and the warning was issued based on radar data showing a clear, strengthening mesocyclone, exactly the signature that warrants a warning under standard National Weather Service protocol. What the warning could not anticipate, because the science of the time did not yet have reliable tools to anticipate it, was that this particular mesocyclone would proceed through its intensification cycle at a rate and to a final intensity that placed it among the most violent tornadoes recorded in the modern era, and that it would do so while concealed by rain over a city of 50,000 people who had already, in the previous half hour, been conditioned by an earlier warning and siren activation to interpret the storm as one they had already, in effect, weathered. What happened in the minutes after the warning was issued is where the Joplin tragedy becomes a case study, not in forecasting failure, but in a specific, well-documented psychological and behavioral phenomenon that disaster researchers call warning fatigue, and that the Joplin event would push into the center of American emergency management. Reform. Joplin's outdoor siren system sounded for the first time that afternoon at approximately 5:09 p.m. in response to a tornado warning that had been issued for a storm cell that ultimately did not produce significant damage to the city. This was not a malfunction or an error. It was the system performing exactly as designed. A warning was issued for a credible threat, and the sirens sounded to alert the public. The threat from that initial warning passed without major consequence to Joplin itself. The sirens then sounded for a second time at 5:17 p.m. in response to the tornado warning for the storm that would, 17 minutes later, produce the deadly tornado. For a significant portion of Joplin's population, this was the second siren activation within roughly 20 minutes, for what appeared from the ground. Without access to radar data or specialized meteorological interpretation, to be a continuation of the same severe weather event that had already passed without producing a visible tornado near most residents. Disaster behavior researchers who later studied resident responses in Joplin documented a consistent and troubling pattern. Many residents reported that the second siren did not significantly alter their behavior, because the first siren had already sounded for what they perceived, reasonably given their information, as the same storm system, and that storm system had not produced an immediately visible threat. This is the mechanism of warning fatigue in its most consequential form, and it is worth being precise about what the phenomenon actually is, because it is frequently misunderstood as a form of public negligence or apathy. It is not that people in Joplin were ignorant of tornado risk or indifferent to siren warnings as a category. Southwest Missouri residents, on average, have substantially more exposure to tornado warnings, tornado safety education, and direct or secondhand experience with tornado damage than the average American. It is that the specific sequence and pattern of warnings that afternoon. 2 siren activations in quick succession, the first one not associated with an observed dramatic tornado, created a learned association, formed in real time over the course of less than 30 minutes, that subsequent sirens that afternoon did not necessarily indicate an imminent, visually confirmable threat requiring an immediate change in behavior. This is a form of rapid behavioral conditioning, the same basic psychological mechanism that underlies habituation to any repeated stimulus that is not consistently followed by a consequence, except compressed, in this case, into a window of minutes, rather than the weeks or months over which habituation typically develops in other contexts. Survivor interviews conducted by researchers from the National Weather Service, academic disaster behavior researchers, and journalists in the months following the disaster converged on a remarkably consistent account. Many residents reported continuing ordinary activities: shopping, driving, working, watching television, after the second siren sounded, specifically because the first siren that afternoon had not been followed by an observable threatening tornado. Several survivors specifically described looking outside after the second siren, seeing what looked like a heavy rainstorm rather than a visually distinct tornado funnel, and concluding, based on that visual assessment, that the threat was likely similar in severity to what had already passed. One detail that emerged repeatedly in post-disaster research and that disaster sociologists consider especially important: a number of survivors specifically reported that they had been monitoring local television weather coverage, which in many markets continued regular. Non-weather programming or only briefly interrupted with weather coverage that, due to the visual ambiguity of the rain-wrapped storm, did not convey the same urgency that a clearly visible tornado funnel on television would have conveyed. The absence of a dramatic visual, the kind of footage that local television weather coverage typically uses to communicate severity to a viewing audience, meant that even residents who turned to television specifically seeking confirmation of the threat level received a visually unremarkable picture of heavy rain, reinforcing rather than correcting the underestimation that the warning fatigue from the dual siren activation had already produced. The rain wrapping of the tornado and the warning fatigue from the repeated siren activations compounded each other in the worst possible way. A clearly visible tornado funnel, even after a fatigued response to sirens, often produces an immediate independent behavioral trigger. People who see a funnel cloud, regardless of how they responded to the siren itself, frequently take protective action upon visual confirmation because the visual stimulus operates independently of and can override the auditory habituation that the repeated sirens produced. The rain-wrapped Joplin tornado removed that independent visual trigger entirely. The siren fatigue removed the auditory trigger's full effectiveness. The combination left a substantial portion of the population without any effective protective signal in the critical final minutes before the tornado's arrival. Not because any single part of the warning chain failed in isolation, but because the two specific failure modes, individually survivable, combined into something the existing system had no redundant mechanism to catch. The tornado that emerged from this supercell was, by the time it reached its peak intensity over the most densely populated sections of Joplin, rated EF5, the highest classification on the enhanced Fujita scale, reserved for tornadoes producing wind speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour, and damage so complete that well-built structures are essentially removed from their foundations. The tornado's path through Joplin ran for approximately 6 miles through the heart of the city, with a maximum width at points exceeding 3/4 of a mile, an extraordinarily large tornado by any historical measure. Large enough that for residents directly in its path, the question of being inside or outside the tornado's circulation was, in the moments before impact, often a matter of which side of a street they happened to be standing on. The tornado's forward speed across the city was relatively fast, estimated at around 20 miles per hour, which meant that once it entered the city, it traversed the densely built residential and commercial core in a matter of minutes. Not the slow, lingering passage that some tornadoes exhibit, but a rapid, sustained intensity transit that left little margin for last-second decisions once the funnel, hidden in rain, was already among the buildings. St. John's Regional Medical Center took a direct hit. The 9-story hospital, serving patients from across the wider southwest Missouri region, was struck by the tornado at close to its peak intensity. Every window on the building's exposed faces was shattered or blown out. The roof was severely damaged, with sections torn away entirely. Medical equipment, patient room furnishings, and structural debris were found scattered for blocks in the direction the tornado continued traveling. Debris from inside the hospital, including X-ray films and patient charts, was later recovered tens of miles away, carried aloft by the tornado's updraft, and deposited by the storm system as it moved northeast across Missouri. The hospital's helicopter, parked on its rooftop landing pad, was found flipped and mangled. Cars in the hospital's parking structure were tossed and stacked on top of one another, some found wrapped around structural support columns. Hospital staff, in the minutes before impact, had moved patients away from windows and into hallways and stairwells according to the facility's severe weather protocol. A protocol that almost certainly saved a substantial number of lives, given the scale of the structural damage the building sustained. Doctors and nurses physically shielded patients with their own bodies in the corridors as the tornado struck, in scenes that survivors and staff later described to journalists and disaster researchers in detail, that became part of the broader American public's understanding of what surviving a direct EF5 strike actually requires of the people caught inside the building when it happens. Despite the severity of the strike, the great majority of patients and staff in the building survived, in significant part because the hospital had a rehearsed protocol and staff who executed it under conditions of near total chaos and darkness, as the power failed and the building structure groaned and shifted around them. 5 patients and 1 visitor at the hospital died, a genuine tragedy, but a death toll that reflected emergency protocols functioning about as well as a protocol reasonably could against a direct strike of this magnitude on a 9-story occupied medical facility. The hospital was so severely damaged that it had to be evacuated entirely in the hours following the strike and was ultimately demolished, with a new replacement facility built at a different location in the years following, a project that became one of the most closely watched pieces of the city's broader recovery. Cars in the hospital's parking structure were tossed and stacked on top of one another, some found wrapped around structural support columns, in damage patterns that engineering teams studying the disaster afterward used to help refine wind speed estimates for the EF5 rating ultimately assigned to that section of the tornado's track. Joplin High School, struck during a period when it was fortunately not in active session for students, the tornado hit on a Sunday evening, after the school day and after that year's graduation ceremony, which had been held just hours earlier at a different venue across town, sustained catastrophic structural damage that would almost certainly have produced a substantially higher death toll had. The tornado struck during a normal school day with students and staff present in numbers. The building's gymnasium and many classroom sections were destroyed. The school's reconstruction became one of the most prominent and closely watched recovery projects in the city, completed in time for the following school year through an extraordinary community and volunteer effort, in part because of the symbolic importance the rebuilt school held for a community trying to demonstrate that it could recover. The residential core of Joplin, block after block of single-family homes, many without basements or dedicated storm shelters, which is common in this region of Missouri due to the area's shallow, rocky soil and historic lead and zinc mining substrate that makes basement excavation more difficult and expensive than in other parts of the Midwest, suffered the overwhelming majority of the fatalities. Without basements, many residents had no below-ground refuge option and relied on interior rooms, closets, and bathrooms as the best available protection. Protection that is effective against EF1 through EF3 tornadoes in many cases, but that offers limited protection against the structural failure modes produced by an EF4 or EF5 strike, where exterior walls and even some interior walls can fail completely, and where the wind-borne debris itself, traveling at lethal velocity, can penetrate spaces that would otherwise be survivable against a weaker tornado. Entire residential subdivisions along the tornado's path were reduced to debris fields indistinguishable in aerial photographs taken in the days following the disaster from the aftermath of a conventional bombing campaign. Mature trees that had stood for generations were stripped of bark and branches, snapped at their trunks, or uprooted entirely. Vehicles were thrown distances of hundreds of feet, crushed, and in some documented cases wrapped around what remained of standing structures. The path of destruction viewed from above showed a corridor of nearly complete devastation roughly 6 miles long and, at its widest, nearly a mile across, a scale of destruction that, when later compared against historical American tornado tracks, placed Joplin among a small number of tornadoes in the modern record capable of producing devastation at that combined width and intensity. The total death toll from the Joplin tornado reached 161 people, with more than 1,000 additional people injured, many seriously, overwhelming the capacity of the region's remaining medical facilities and requiring the deployment of additional medical resources from across the state and from federal disaster medical assistance teams in the days following the storm. It stands as the deadliest single tornado in the United States since a tornado that struck Flint, Michigan in 1953, and the costliest tornado in American history in terms of direct property damage, with damage estimates exceeding $2.8 billion, a figure reflecting both the tornado's extraordinary width and intensity and the fact that its path ran directly through one of the most densely built-up sections of a mid-sized American city, rather than through the more sparsely populated rural terrain where many violent tornadoes in this region typically track. What can the science that monitors tornadoes actually do? And where, as the Joplin event demonstrated with brutal clarity, does its current capability stop? The National Weather Service's Tornado Warning System, built around Doppler radar networks that can detect the rotational signature of a developing mesocyclone, has dramatically improved average tornado warning lead times since the system's modern form was established in the 1990s. Average lead time for tornado warnings nationally has increased from a period when many tornadoes struck with little or no advance warning to an average, by the 2010s, of approximately 13 minutes, and the Joplin warning, issued 17 minutes before the tornado's touchdown in the city, exceeded that average. The radar coverage across the central United States, provided by the NexRad network of approximately 160 Doppler radar installations, gives forecasters continuous, near real-time observation of storm structure across virtually the entire tornado-prone region of the country, updating every few minutes with enough resolution to track the development of rotation within individual storm cells. The limitation that Joplin exposed was not in the warning issuance. It was in the translation of a technically successful warning into actual protective behavior at the scale of an entire city, in the specific circumstance where the storm's behavior, rain wrapping that obscured visual confirmation, and an intensification rate that compressed the effective decision-making window, worked against the public's ability to process and act on the warning information they had received. This is a distinction that the field of meteorology had, before Joplin, addressed primarily as a downstream communication and public education problem rather than as a core scientific and warning design challenge in its own right. Joplin forced a reconsideration of where the boundary of meteorological responsibility should sit, whether the science's job ends at accurate warning issuance, or whether it must extend further into actively engineering the warning's communication to overcome known, predictable patterns of human behavioral response. This is the specific and uncomfortable finding that emerged from the formal post-disaster assessments conducted by the National Weather Service, FEMA, and academic disaster researchers in the years following 2011, a technically excellent warning issued with above-average lead time through a highly rated siren infrastructure. In a population with substantial prior exposure to tornado risk and tornado safety messaging, still failed to produce adequate protective action for a meaningful fraction of the at-risk population, because of factors, warning fatigue and rain wrapping specifically, that the warning system as constituted in 2011 had not been designed to account for or actively counteract. The response to this finding reshaped tornado warning communication practice across the United States in the years following Joplin. The National Weather Service introduced what it calls impact-based warnings in the years following the Joplin disaster, beginning with pilot programs in 2012 and expanding nationally in the years that followed. Rather than issuing a uniform tornado warning regardless of the storm's observed or anticipated severity, impact-based warnings now include specific escalated language for the most dangerous storms. Phrases like "this is a particularly dangerous situation," or, in the most extreme cases, language explicitly invoking the possibility of an event comparable to historically catastrophic tornadoes, designed specifically to break through the kind of warning fatigue that compromised protective action in Joplin. The warning text itself was restructured to include specific, concrete language about expected damage, describing in plain terms what a violent tornado does to a house, a vehicle, a human body, rather than relying solely on the technical, somewhat clinical language that prior generations of warnings had used. The goal of this change was explicit and directly traceable to the Joplin postmortem. Differentiate the most dangerous warnings from routine warnings in a way that overcomes the psychological habituation that repeated, uniform warnings produce, by making clear, in the warning text itself, that this specific warning is not like the ones that came before it that afternoon. The National Weather Service and academic partners also significantly expanded research into rain-wrapped tornado detection using dual polarization radar technology, an upgrade to the National Radar Network that was, in fact, already underway as part of a broader modernization program, but that took on additional urgency and research focus following Joplin. Dual polarization radar transmits and receives radar pulses in both horizontal and vertical orientations simultaneously, allowing it to distinguish the shape and behavior of the objects reflecting the radar signal. Raindrops, which are relatively flat and uniform, behave differently in dual polarization data than irregular, varied debris. This allows the radar to detect a signature called the debris ball or debris signature, the radar return produced specifically by airborne debris being lofted by a tornado, distinguishable from the radar return produced by rainfall alone. This technology allows meteorologists to confirm the presence of a tornado-generated debris field even when heavy rain makes visual or even traditional single-polarization radar confirmation of rotation difficult, providing an additional, independent confirmation channel for exactly the rain-wrapped scenario that compromised visual confirmation in Joplin. The National Radar Network's transition to dual polarization technology was completed across virtually all NexRad sites by 2013. 2 years after Joplin, accelerating a modernization timeline that had previously been projected to take considerably longer. Joplin's own civic recovery in the years following the disaster included a comprehensive review and overhaul of the city's tornado warning communication protocols, specifically designed to break the warning fatigue pattern that contributed to the 2011 death toll. The city implemented changes to how and when sirens are activated, sought to reduce activations for storms that do not meet a higher confidence threshold for direct, imminent threat to the city itself, and significantly expanded public messaging around the specific danger of rain-wrapped tornadoes, teaching residents explicitly that the absence of a visible funnel cloud during a tornado warning does not indicate the absence of a tornado. A piece of public safety education that simply had not been emphasized with sufficient clarity before 2011, because rain-wrapped tornado risk, while known to meteorologists, had not been communicated as a primary public safety message at the scale it required. Joplin's experience became a case study taught in emergency management training programs across the country, used specifically to illustrate the gap between a technically functioning warning system and an effectively protective one. What the Joplin tornado revealed, at the level of basic atmospheric science, also advanced the field's understanding of extremely rapid tornado intensification, a phenomenon that has received significantly more dedicated research attention in the years since 2011. Particularly using the expanding network of mobile, truck-mounted Doppler radar units that storm-chasing research teams, including those affiliated with universities and federal research programs such as the National Severe Storms Laboratory, now deploy specifically to capture high-resolution data on tornadoes during their most active intensification phases. These mobile radar platforms, positioned by trained crews who follow developing supercells in real time, can capture wind velocity data inside a tornado's circulation at a level of detail that fixed stationary radar installations, which are often dozens of miles from any given storm, and limited by the curvature of the Earth and how low to the ground they can effectively scan, simply cannot provide. Research stemming in part from case studies including Joplin has worked to better characterize the specific atmospheric conditions, the precise combinations of instability, shear, and moisture, along with internal storm structure variables like the rear flank downdraft behavior that produce the fastest intensification rates, with the goal of eventually building that knowledge into improved warning lead time and improved warning language for storms that show early signatures consistent with the potential for extremely rapid strengthening. The honest assessment, more than a decade after Joplin, is that meteorological science has made measurable documented progress on every specific failure mode the disaster exposed: warning fatigue, rain-wrapped tornado detection, and the communication of extreme danger relative to routine danger without fully solving any of them. Impact-based warning language helps differentiate the most dangerous storms, but the fundamental challenge of breaking habituation in a population that by definition lives in a region experiencing severe weather warnings dozens of times each spring remains only partially addressed. Dual polarization radar improves debris detection, but it still requires a tornado to already be on the ground and producing debris before that specific confirmation becomes available. It does not extend warning lead time before touchdown. And rapid intensification of the kind documented at Joplin remains, fundamentally, difficult to anticipate with high confidence before it begins. Even with improved understanding of the contributing atmospheric ingredients, because the specific trigger that converts a mesocyclone with favorable ingredients into a rapidly strengthening tornado, rather than a weaker or non-tornadic circulation, continues to resist precise short-term prediction. The global implications of what the Joplin event taught the meteorological community extend well beyond the borders of Missouri, or even the United States. Tornadoes are not a uniquely American phenomenon, though the central United States produces them with a frequency and intensity unmatched anywhere else on the planet, owing to the specific geography that places the Rocky Mountains, the Gulf of Mexico, and the open expanse of the Great Plains in a configuration that reliably produces the moisture, instability, and wind shear combinations necessary for supercell and tornado development. Bangladesh, with its own distinct monsoon-influenced severe weather patterns, experiences some of the deadliest tornadoes in human history in absolute death toll terms, including events that have killed over 1,000 people in a single tornado, a toll driven significantly by extremely high population density in rural areas with limited access to sturdy shelter, lightweight building materials common in the region, and warning infrastructure far less developed than what existed even in pre-2011 Joplin. This represents a different vulnerability profile than Joplin's, but one where the lessons about clear, escalated, fatigue-resistant warning communication translate directly, and where international meteorological cooperation programs have specifically referenced the Joplin case study in developing severe weather communication protocols for South Asian National Meteorological Services. Canada's prairie provinces experience tornado risk that, while less frequent than the American Midwest, follows similar supercell dynamics and benefits directly from warning system research conducted south of the border, given the shared continental weather patterns and the close working relationship between Environment and Climate Change Canada's severe weather forecasters and their American counterparts. European countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and several others, experience tornadoes more frequently than is commonly understood by the general public. The United Kingdom alone reports dozens of confirmed tornadoes most years, typically weaker than the most violent American events, but capable of significant localized damage. And European meteorological services have studied the American impact-based warning system specifically as a model for their own severe weather communication reform, recognizing that the warning fatigue and visual confirmation challenges documented at Joplin are not specific to American storm structure, but are general features of how any human population processes repeated emergency alerts. Australia, which experiences its own significant severe thunderstorm and tornado activity, particularly across its eastern agricultural regions, has incorporated case studies from Joplin and subsequent American tornado events into the training curriculum for its Bureau of Meteorology severe weather forecasters, specifically around the question of how to communicate escalating threat levels to a public that, in a given severe weather season, may receive dozens of warnings of varying actual severity. The fundamental lesson that a technically accurate, appropriately timed warning is necessary but not sufficient for effective public protection, and that the gap between warning issuance and protective public action is itself a critical variable that emergency management and meteorological communication must actively engineer for, rather than treat as an unavoidable byproduct of an otherwise successful forecast, has become a foundational principle in disaster risk communication research worldwide. It is cited specifically in academic literature and applied emergency management training programs studying hazards far beyond tornadoes, including hurricane evacuation compliance research in the Gulf Coast and Atlantic seaboard. wildfire evacuation timing studies in California and Australia, and tsunami warning response research in coastal communities across the Pacific, where researchers studying why some populations evacuate promptly after a tsunami warning and others delay dangerously have explicitly drawn on the warning fatigue framework that the Joplin disaster brought into sharp, costly focus. Joplin rebuilt. The city's recovery in the years following 2011 included not just physical reconstruction, new homes, a rebuilt high school completed in time for the following academic year, a relocated and modernized hospital campus built with the lessons of the disaster engineered directly into its design, but a fundamental reconsideration of how a community communicates mortal danger to its own residents in. The compressed, chaotic minutes when a storm that radar shows clearly is approaching a population that, from the ground, cannot clearly see it coming. The volunteers who arrived in the days and weeks following the disaster, from across Missouri, from across the country, organized through churches, through AmeriCorps, through informal networks of people who simply drove toward the devastation because they had skills that could help, cleared debris, rebuilt homes, and in the process became part of a recovery story that the city has worked deliberately to keep visible alongside the harder story of what the warning system failed to do. Both stories are true. The city that rebuilt with extraordinary speed and the city that lost 161 residents to a storm its own siren system had announced are the same city, and Joplin's public memory of the disaster has, in the years since, tried to hold both truths without letting one erase the other. The sirens over Joplin still sound today when a credible tornado threat approaches the city. They sound less frequently than they did before May 22, 2011, because the threshold for activation has been deliberately raised, specifically to preserve the public's responsiveness to the warning when it matters most. The city learned at a cost of 161 lives that a warning system's value is not measured only by whether it sounds. It is measured by whether, when it sounds, the people who hear it still believe it. The radar showed the tornado clearly the entire time, from well before it touched down to the moment its circulation finally weakened and dissipated northeast of the city it had just devastated. The sirens sounded on schedule with adequate lead time, exactly as the system was designed to perform. The rain hid the tornado from the eyes of the people in its path. The second siren, sounding so soon after the first, hid the danger from the part of the mind that decides, in the space of a few seconds, whether to take cover or to keep watching the rain fall. 161 people did not have enough warning, even though by every formal measure the system tracks, the warning was there. The storm is the part of this story that meteorology can model with increasing precision. The moment a person decides whether to believe the siren is the part that, more than a decade later, the science is still learning how to reach.